Okay. In 1996, all research tech projects were funded either by the government or by private corporations. The Gilman Survey, a research tech project, was not funded by the government but was conducted in 1996. It must therefore have been funded by private corporations.
Okay, so how would you go about, what would you do first here?
Find the conclusion.
Yeah, yeah. So what is our conclusion?
It must therefore have been funded by private corporations.
Yep. And so for parallel questions, so this is a parallel reasoning, so at least we know it's not a flaw. I do typically diagram these just because I think it's easier for me to cross off wrong answer choices.
Okay.
So we're saying in 1996, all research tech projects were funded either by the government or by private corporations. So if it was a project, that means that it was funded either by the government. Actually, I should do it this way. If it was a project, it was funded by the government or it was funded by private corporations. The Gilman Survey, a research tech project, was not funded by the government, but was conducted in 1996. So we're saying if it's not conducted by the government, it must therefore have been funded by a private corporation. So what we did here is we say that if we have one condition, it must have one or the other of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And since it didn't have the one, it must have the other. So we're going to look for an answer that like has that same exact parallel. So one thing people get confused about is they think that like the parallel has to do with like the order of the items. The
Mm-hmm.
order of the items don't necessarily matter. So if potentially our conclusion could be first in the argument,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not that they have to be in the same order, but we have to have all the same pieces. So those
Yeah.
are what need to be parallel. And so what were you debating between here?
So I picked um said D, but I it was one of those where it was between two answers.
Okay.
Um I was between D and B, and I kind of picked B just because I felt like it paralleled it more, especially when it threw that date in there of 1993. Kind of like I felt like it had to, like you said, some people take all that has to have all the pieces and has to go in that order.
Not necessarily pieces of dates, but pieces as if like, hold on, let's look at it. So what is our conclusion? Let me show you exactly what I mean. So what is our conclusion in B?
B. Legal restrictions on consumer purchases such as Ordinance 05 are either paternalistic or protect civil liberties. Ordinance 04 is not paternalistic, so it must protect civil liberties. So it must protect civil liberties is a
So
conclusion.
we have a conclusion here, so that's good so far. And on the bottom one, we're saying it must be a legal restriction in consumer research purchases. One other thing that needs to line up is the strength of the conclusion. And so here we have like it must. We're not saying like it's likely or it could. We're saying like this will happen. And that also happens in both of our answer choices too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like that too, that it's there's none that we actually could cross off for that reason, but sometimes it'll go from like a must to a some or something. Um, and then so B says legal restrictions on consumer purchases such as Ordinance 304 are either P or PCL. Oh, sorry, you said D. Let's start with the one that you picked. So D says legal restrictions on consumer purchases are either P or designed to protect civil liberties.
Mm-hmm.
So the legal restrictions, it's lining up good so far, are either designed to protect either P or they're designed to protect civil liberties. So far we're good. All ordinances passed in 1993 are P. Okay. Since Ordinance 304 was passed in 1993, it must be a legal restriction. This is actually flawed because they're saying all ordinances passed in 1993. So if it's passed in 1993,
Mm-hmm.
it must be P. And then we
Mhm.
go on and say, since Ordinance 304 was passed in 1993, it must be a legal restriction on consumer purchases.
Yeah.
Do you see how like that tells like this is the same? Like we're not like saying like, oh, for
Yeah.
it to be right, it would have to say, like since it was not like it's hard because it's saying in 1993 they were this. For this one to be right, it would say something like, all ordinances passed in 1993 were not paternalistic. So since Ordinance 304 was passed in 1903, it must be on what's her to protect civil liberties or something
Mhm.
like that. Do you see how
Yeah.
that's different?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And then B says legal restrictions on consumer purchases such as 304 are either P or CL. So we're
Yep.
actually the same up until this point. Cool.
Mhm.
It says O is not P, therefore it must be CL. And that lines up perfectly with what our original one was down below.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
Cool. Are there any other ones? Are there other answer choices you want to go over?
No, it was just basically I was stuck between those two.